"You're too poor to join our Christmas, go home." My mother-in-law insulted me in front of everyone. "Even your dress looks borrowed," she snickered. 2 months later, I was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. What happened next? When I met Julian, I didn't think we'd end up married. Not because I didn't love him, I did, very quickly, in fact, but because our worlds were wildly different. He was in a private school and an Ivy League. I was in public school and scholarships. His parents played golf at country clubs. Mine managed a corner grocery and drove the same Toyota Corolla for 15 years. Julian never made me feel lesser. His mom, Claudette, though. From day one, she did. The first time we met, she looked me up and down like I was a guest who had shown up too early to a party and brought the wrong wine. She asked me if my parents had anyone in finance, and when I said no, she smiled politely and moved on to talk about her art collection. I dealt with it. I smiled through brunches. I helped clean up after dinners. I bit my tongue when she made subtle digs about my background or when she jokingly asked if I could follow dinner etiquette. Julian noticed, and while he always apologized later, I tried not to make him choose sides. At the time, I thought enduring it was the better path. That maybe, eventually, I'd prove myself. But there was always a gap. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how well I dressed or how polite I was the girl from Queens with a big dream and no pedigree. By the time Julian and I got married, I had launched a small tech startup. It wasn't fancy, and it certainly wasn't profitable yet, but it was mine. A remote collaboration tool I'd built from scratch, through late nights, trial and error coding, and the quiet prayers of someone chasing something big. Julian believed in it. No one else in his family even asked about it. Christmas that year was the first one Julian really insisted I attend with his family in Greenwich. I'd skipped the last few years, mostly citing work, which wasn't a lie, I was grinding. But this time, he said things would be different. Claudette had been making an effort. She even sent me a handwritten invitation with a note about how she looked forward to seeing me. I should have known. When we arrived, the place was decked out in what could only be described as catalog-level holiday glamour. The foyer had fresh pine garlands lining the staircase, the living room had a 12-foot tree covered in glass ornaments that probably cost more than my rent. The dining room shimmered with crystal, gold-plated flatware, and name cards for all 15 guests. I wore a forest green dress from a rising Indian-American designer in Brooklyn, not a brand name that would mean anything to Claudette, but something I loved. My heels were polished, my makeup was soft. I was confident, despite the butterflies. Everything seemed fine, at first. There was small talk, lots of wine, and too many side glances from Julian's cousin Alina, who once drunkenly told me she thought I was brave for marrying outside my social class. Whatever that meant. The dinner was loud. Laughter, stories about ski trips, debates about real estate. I tried to contribute when I could, but Claudette barely acknowledged me. Then, during dessert, she tapped her wine glass with a spoon. That sound still haunts me. She stood at the head of the table, glass in hand, and smiled like a queen addressing her court. "I just wanted to say how lovely it is to have almost everyone here this year," she began, her voice perfectly measured. "There's something special about traditions. Knowing your roots. Appreciating where we come from." I already felt my stomach turn. She scanned the table, then landed her gaze on me. "And knowing when something, or someone, doesn't quite belong." A few uncomfortable chuckles. Claudette smiled wider. "Priya, dear, even your dress looks borrowed. But I admire the spirit." Julian froze. Everyone else started. I stood. Quietly. My hands were trembling, but I refused to show it. I excused myself without a word. And I walked out of that house. I didn't cry until we were halfway back to the city. Julian sat in silence, one hand on the steering wheel, the other gripping mine. He knew it was over, not us, but my willingness to take any more. I think something snapped in me that night. Not a breakdown. A breakthrough. The weeks that followed were intense. I threw myself into work like a woman possessed. I stopped trying to be accepted and instead focused on building something undeniable. I pitched relentlessly. Polished my pitch deck until it gleamed. Scheduled demo calls across time zones. Slept maybe 4 hours a night. Cried once, in a bathroom stall after a VC meeting that almost went south, then fixed my eyeliner and kept going. By late January, I got my first major investor. Then another. My app started trending in professional circles on LinkedIn, and a viral post about my journey from garage founder to global deal closer took off. Emails started pouring in. I was signing clients faster than I could onboard them. On February 23rd, I was listed in Forbes 30 under 30. My parents cried. Julian took me to dinner. Claudette? Well. She sent a congratulatory email, the first one she had ever sent me, with the subject line, impressive. Let's chat soon? Right. A week later, Julian and I were invited back to their townhouse for a private dinner. Just us and his parents. I debated whether to go at all. Julian said I didn't owe them anything. But I went. Not for Claudette, for me. I showed up in a sleek white pantsuit custom tailored for me by the same designer I wore at Christmas. I didn't need to show off, but I wanted to walk into that room and be unshakably myself. Claudette opened the door and gave me a once-over, no judgment this time, but no warmth either. Priya, she said. You look successful. I smiled. I am. Dinner was a civil affair. Claudette asked questions, polite, shallow ones. Her husband, Frederick, asked more thoughtful ones about the business. Claudette occasionally nodded. When I mentioned my latest partnership deal, she raised her eyebrows and said, well, that's unexpected. I wasn't even mad anymore. It just didn't matter. Later that night, I noticed a magazine on the coffee table with a small headline blurb about me. Claudette had clearly placed it there on purpose. That was her way of saying she saw me now. The ride back to our apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence. This one was full of reflection. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. Done trying to be accepted into a family that only saw worth in prestige and pedigree. Julian reached for my hand as we crossed into the city limits. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, I replied. I didn't do it for her. And I hadn't. I did it to walk back into that house on my own terms. I did it to reclaim the part of myself that had, for too long, played small to make others comfortable. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My calendar is filled with back-to-back investor meetings, partnership calls, interviews, and onboarding sessions for new enterprise clients. I was traveling constantly, LA one week, Austin the next, then a brief hop to London for a conference. I was exhausted, but also more alive than I'd felt in years. Julian, to his credit, was incredibly supportive. He never tried to dim my light. But I noticed the distance starting to build between him and his family. Not because of me, not directly, but because he was finally seeing what I'd dealt with all those years. He stopped answering Claudette's calls as often. Stopped laughing off her jabs. When she made a comment over lunch about me overexerting myself for media attention, Julian ended the conversation mid-meal. She's not performing, he told her. She's achieving. That might have been the first time I truly felt like I had a partner who had grown out of his mother's shadow. Meanwhile, my parents were having their own moment of adjustment. When they saw my Forbes profile, my dad printed it and framed it above the cash register in his store. My mom cried and made enough biryani to feed a wedding. They didn't understand venture capital or SaaS, but they understood hustle, risk, and pride. And they finally saw that all the long nights, all the missed birthdays, were leading somewhere. Then, something strange started happening. Claudette started trying. She invited me to a charity gala she chaired, something she'd never done before. She emailed asking for my opinion on a digital efficiency tool for one of her nonprofit boards. She mentioned me, casually, in conversation with other socialites. Apparently, now that I was on the cover of a few industry magazines, I had graduated from embarrassment to asset. I was wary. Julian, too. He saw the shift for what it was: strategic. "She's rewriting the narrative," he said one night as we lay in bed, both of us scrolling on our phones. "I'm the rags to riches story she gets to flaunt now," I replied, not bitterly, just matter of fact. But something inside me had already changed. Her opinion didn't carry the weight it used to. I didn't feel the need to impress her anymore. I wasn't seeking validation. I was operating on a different frequency, and she couldn't touch it. Things came to a head one afternoon at a networking luncheon in Midtown. Claudette had invited me, saying it would be a nice place to meet potential collaborators. I almost didn't go, but Julian nudged me. "Go," he said. "You don't have to say yes to anything. Just go be you." So I did. It was one of those polished, uptight events where people wore confidence like armor and conversations had a 3-second delay while everyone assessed social hierarchy. I walked in wearing a soft beige jumpsuit and a gold cuff bracelet, understated, but elegant. Claudette was already there, deep in conversation with a woman in pearls and a man whose suit probably cost more than my entire college education. When she saw me, her eyes lit up in that way that wasn't quite joy, more like calculation. She beckoned me over and introduced me as my daughter-in-law, Priya, the Forbes featured entrepreneur. It was the first time she'd ever introduced me without saying Julian's wife first. I kept my tone polite, smiled, nodded, and made conversation. The woman in pearls, Meredith, I think, asked me about how I balanced work and family. I gave a standard response about boundaries and time blocking. Claudette laughed softly. "Well, she certainly had time to run away from family dinners," she said. A joke. A nudge. A test. I didn't flinch. "I've learned the difference between being included and being tolerated," I said, smiling. "And how to choose my peace over tradition." The woman in pearls blinked. The man in the expensive suit chuckled. "Well said," he murmured. Claudette said nothing, but her grip on her wineglass tightened. That was the day I realized we weren't just on different pages, we were in different books entirely. I was no longer the outsider trying to get in. She was the gatekeeper of a world I no longer needed. That night, Julian and I ordered Thai takeout and ate on the couch in our apartment, surrounded by laptops, signed contracts, and a dog-eared copy of my business plan. He watched me as I scrolled through my messages, then said something I wasn't expecting. "I've been thinking," he said. "About Connecticut. About Christmas. About all of it." I looked up. "Yeah?" He hesitated. "Do you ever think? Maybe we build our own traditions now? Just us?" That hit me harder than any insult Claudette had ever thrown. Because for the first time I realized, I didn't just want distance from her. I wanted freedom from the entire performance of trying to make it work. I didn't want to be part of a legacy that required me to shrink myself to fit in. I wanted to start a new one. I wish I could say that after that conversation with Julian, everything became easy. That we instantly broke away from his family's grip and built this perfect, boundary-filled, drama-free life. But that's not how real life works. People don't just change overnight. Patterns take time to unravel. Julian started pulling away more, yes. He stopped showing up to every birthday brunch Claudette invited him to, and he turned down her sudden offers to network me with some of her friends' husbands who were in venture capital. But the thing about people like Claudette is, they don't retreat quietly. They just repackage control in more subtle ways. For weeks after that luncheon, she sent articles to Julian titled things like "Maintaining Family Ties in a Busy World" or "Why Working Women Mustn't Forget the Home." She forwarded me invites to women in philanthropy luncheons and elite fashion trunk shows, as if she had decided to accept me, but only on the condition that I performed the role she had carved out. She still never asked me a real question about my work. Never once said, "Tell me how you got here." Not even after I was asked to speak on a panel at the Fast Company Innovation Festival, or when my face showed up on the cover of a tech leadership magazine. To her, I had value, but not humanity. And still, part of me kept showing up. I didn't want to. But I did. A part of me still clung to the hope that maybe if I just kept succeeding, she would soften. Maybe one day she'd say something genuine. I thought that when people see your light enough, they stop trying to dim it. But people like Claudette aren't interested in light. They're interested in mirrors, in what reflects well on them. It all came to a head again in early spring. Julian and I were invited to his cousin Everett's engagement dinner at a luxury townhouse near Bryant Park. It was one of those events where the champagne never stopped flowing and every conversation started with, "So what do you do?" I had just signed a major partnership with a global SaaS firm that would triple our annual revenue. I was running on adrenaline and caffeine and had barely slept in days, but I went, mostly for Julian. Claudette was there, of course, in head-to-toe Chanel, commanding attention in every corner of the room. When we arrived, she smiled and hugged Julian, then turned to me with that rehearsed warmth she'd been using lately. "So glad you could make it, Priya," she said, brushing my cheek with air kisses. "I read about your latest tech alliance. Sounds impressive." "Very. Contemporary. Contemporary. Like I was a design trend." I smiled tightly and thanked her. We made our way through the crowd, and I did what I always do. I held space for Julian's family, smiled, made polite conversation, and endured. Until I overheard her. I had stepped into the hallway to answer a work call. When I came back inside, I paused outside the dining room and heard Claudette talking to one of her friends. Her voice was low, but her words carried. "She's clever, I'll give her that. But let's be honest, she's lucky. Right place, right time. Without Julian's last name, no one in our circles would take her seriously." My breath caught. The friend murmured something inaudible. Claudette laughed softly. "I let her come around more now because it looks good. Diversity is in vogue. And she's done well for herself. But she'll always be the girl who didn't belong here." I didn't move. I didn't barge in. I just stood there, frozen. And in that moment, something in me crystallized. She would never change. She would never see me. All the effort, all the grace I extended, the bridges I tried to build, they were one-sided. And I was done. I turned and walked back out of the party. I sent Julian a text that I'd gone home. I didn't feel the need to explain. Not anymore. When he got back later that night, I was already in bed, laptop open, working on an internal strategy doc for our new client onboarding process. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down next to me, ran a hand through his hair, and sighed. "She said something, didn't she?" I didn't look away from the screen. "She always says something." He nodded, silent for a moment. "I heard her once. A few months ago. On a call with her friend. She called you a social experiment that paid off." I finally looked at him. "I didn't tell you because I knew it would hurt," he said. "But I think you already knew." I closed the laptop and rested my head on his shoulder. "I don't want to keep being her performance piece," I said quietly. "I don't want our life to revolve around her ego." He kissed the top of my head. "Then let's stop performing." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. No ultimatums or slammed doors. Just a quiet agreement that we were done dancing around Claudette's world. We didn't cut her off. That's not how Julian is, and honestly, I didn't need that. I just stopped engaging. No more RSVPing to her parties. No more playing the daughter-in-law she could show off. When she invited us to a fundraiser a few weeks later, Julian went alone. "She asked about you," he told me afterward. "I said you were building an empire." And I was. My company had grown from a lean startup to a fully operational team of 40 across 4 countries. We had just leased a new office in Soho, though most of our team still worked remotely. I was mentoring young female founders through a nonprofit I quietly funded. I wasn't just succeeding. I was creating space. And slowly, life took a different shape. My parents came over more. We hosted Sunday dinners in our apartment, full of spices and stories and laughter. Julian's friends, the ones who actually respected me, became our real community. I learned to say no to things that felt like obligations masquerading as opportunity. Claudette still reached out. Sometimes, I respond. Usually, I didn't. She sent emails congratulating me on this panel or that article, still phrasing it like my success somehow reflected on her. I stopped correcting her. She was no longer the mountain I was trying to climb. She was just a woman standing on a hill, watching someone else build a skyline. And I had things to build. The shift didn't happen all at once, it never does. It was more like tectonic plates shifting quietly under the surface. One day you realize the whole landscape of your life looks different, but you can't pinpoint the exact moment it changed. After that engagement party and everything I overheard, something in me turned off. Not emotionally, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even surprised anymore. But I had finally accepted the truth: no amount of accomplishment, charm, or strategic silence would ever turn Claudette into the kind of woman who could see someone like me as an equal. And strangely, letting go of that illusion was freeing. My focus snapped back into my own world. Into my company. Into the team that now looked to me as a leader. Into the version of myself I had promised the younger me I'd become, not the diluted, polite version I used to play at family dinners. Julian, for all his upbringing and inherited calm, noticed the change before I did. "You've been lighter lately," he said one Sunday morning. We were both still in pajamas, sipping coffee on our balcony. Not less busy, just clearer. I didn't answer right away. I just looked out over the city, at the buildings I used to stare at as a teenager visiting Midtown on weekends, wondering what kind of people worked inside them. Now I was one of those people. More than that, I was someone building something in them. "It's because I stopped trying to make her love me," I finally said. Julian didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly. "I never needed her love," I added. "I just thought I did." That was a quiet truth I wish I'd realized sooner. The months that followed brought more change, not drama, but real evolution. My company expanded. We launched a new feature that got picked up by a major publication. I was asked to speak at a Women in Tech roundtable in DC. Julian came with me. Sat front row. Clapped the loudest. And then, just when I thought I was done dealing with Claudette's particular brand of manipulation, she sent a package. It was a handwritten note, on her usual monogram stationery. Folded neatly around a slim invitation card. "Dearest Priya, I know our history has been rocky, but family always finds its way back to each other. We are hosting a spring gathering at the summer house. It would mean a great deal if you and Julian would attend. Your presence would be appreciated. I also believe there are some guests who would be quite interested in your work. Warmly, Claudette." Julian found me standing in the kitchen with the envelope still in my hand. "She's trying again," I said flatly. He looked at the card. "She always does when there's something to gain." "I know." I put the card down. "She's networking through me now." He didn't argue. I could have ignored it, and part of me wanted to. But something about that invite irritated me more than the others. Maybe it was the language, the way she wrote "guests who would be interested in your work" like I was some walking LinkedIn profile she could parade around her circle. It didn't feel like reconciliation. It felt like branding. So I replied. Not with a yes. Not with a no. Just, "Thank you for the invitation. I hope your guests enjoy the event. Regards, Priya." A week later, she followed up. Another email. This one is shorter, more clipped. "Understood. I just thought we were moving forward. I hope this isn't a step backward." I didn't answer. Because it wasn't a step backward. It was a full step forward, away from the part of my life that kept me small. Julian had my back, even when it meant walking away from the familiar. He still saw his family occasionally, but the visits became fewer. The guilt trips kept coming, but he stopped internalizing them. We created our own rhythm: small dinners with friends, weekend trips without pretense, honest conversations about starting a family one day, if we ever decided we were ready. And then one afternoon, about 6 months after the Christmas dinner that started it all, I was sitting in a downtown cafe, waiting to meet with an early-stage founder who had reached out asking for mentorship. She was fresh out of grad school, barely 23, bursting with ideas and nerves. When she arrived, she looked both excited and terrified. I remembered that feeling all too well. We talked for 2 hours. I gave her notes on her pitch deck, told her what to avoid when presenting to investors, and reassured her that the doubt she felt was normal, expected, even. As we were wrapping up, she looked at me and said, "You're honestly the reason I didn't give up. When I read about you, I saw someone who looked like me. Who came from where I come from." It hit me so hard I almost forgot to breathe. That was the moment I realized something Claudette never could: your value isn't in the rooms you get invited into. It's in the people who feel seen because you were there. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't vindication. It was for a purpose. It wasn't long after that cafe meeting that things took a turn, not in my world, but in Claudette's. Julian had mentioned once or twice that the Carter family trust, while still sizable, was not as ironclad as it appeared. Old money tends to look permanent, but it only takes a few generations of mismanagement and overspending for it to dwindle. Claudette, ever the image keeper, had made it her personal mission to preserve appearances, even when the foundation beneath was cracking. The cracks finally showed. It started with a wrongdoing at one of the nonprofit boards she chaired. A financial review revealed questionable allocations and unapproved expenses, nothing criminal, but enough to cause a stir. Her name was associated just closely enough that donors began to distance themselves. Then came a real estate deal gone wrong: an overleveraged property in Connecticut sold at a loss. Quietly, discreetly, the Carters began liquidating assets. To the public, they were still the Carters. But in private, it was panic and damage control. Julian told me bits and pieces. He didn't relish it. He didn't mock it. But I could tell he was watching the empire he'd grown up in finally show its fragility. "She called today," he said one night as we made dinner together. "She wants advice." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Fundraising," he said with a half-smile. "For the foundation. She's trying to rebuild her donor base. Asked if maybe you'd be willing to make introductions." I set the spoon down. I wasn't angry, I was stunned. Not just by the audacity, but by the irony. "She wants my help?" He nodded slowly. "She's not in a great place. She's scared, but she won't admit it. You're the only person she knows who's successfully built something from the ground up." I exhaled, then laughed softly. She used to say I didn't belong in her world. Now she wants to be part of mine. Julian didn't respond. He didn't have to. I didn't reply to her right away. I needed to think. And to be honest, I wasn't sure what I wanted. Revenge? Maybe. But I wasn't that kind of person. I didn't want her to suffer. I just wanted her to see, to really understand what she had thrown away when she looked down on me all those years. So I invited her to coffee. Just me and her. No Julian. No crowd. Neutral ground. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing sunglasses and a carefully wrapped scarf, like someone playing at discretion. When she saw me, she smiled, not the brittle kind I was used to, but something more strained. Nervous, maybe. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down. Her voice was softer than usual. Measured. "I hear you're in a difficult position," I said evenly. She folded her hands. "Yes. Things have been challenging." I nodded, not offering comfort. Just listening. She hesitated before speaking again. I realize I've never given you the credit you deserve. You've built something remarkable. And I need help. I won't pretend it's easy for me to ask. There it was. Not an apology. Not exactly. But the closest I would probably ever get. I let the silence stretch just a beat too long, enough for her to feel the weight of it. You know, I said, finally, for years I let you make me feel small. I played along. I smiled through your comments, I tried to prove myself, tried to fit in. But I was never the problem, Claudette. You were. She didn't argue. I continued. Now you're asking me to help you rebuild the very thing you used to weaponize against me. Your network. Your name. Your influence. A flicker of something crossed her face, regret, perhaps, or recognition. I'm not going to fund your recovery, I said. But I will offer you this, a connection to a friend of mine who runs a nonprofit fundraising consultancy. She's brilliant. Fair. And she doesn't care about family names. Her jaw tensed, but she nodded. That's more than I expected. I leaned forward slightly. Let me be clear, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because I believe in women rebuilding. Even women like you. She met my gaze. For once, there was no condescension. No games. Understood, she said. Thank you. We stood up, and as she gathered her purse, she paused. You were never what I imagined for my son, she said quietly. But I see now. That's because my imagination was limited. That might have been the closest thing to a real apology she could give. I walked out of that cafe feeling. Not triumphant, not vindictive. Just steady. Settled. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about having outgrown her world so completely that her approval no longer held weight. Julian and I kept building our life. We bought a place in Brooklyn, a brownstone with old floors and big windows, where my parents came over every Sunday and brought too much food. My company reached Series B funding and was expanding into new verticals. I hired women who reminded me of myself a decade ago, scrappy, underestimated, hungry. Claudette? She faded into the background. Still around, still part of family functions here and there, but quieter now. Less performative. She no longer saw me as a threat or a project. I think she finally saw me for what I was, someone who had succeeded in spite of her, not because of her. The real victory wasn't that she needed my help. It was that I didn't need hers. And when the next Christmas rolled around, Julian and I spent it with my family. In Queens. Eating samosas and laughing over old photo albums. Claudette sent a card. No insults hidden between the lines. Just a signature, and a quiet line that said, wishing you peace this year. You've earned it.